Thank you, everyone. Good to see you all, and hope you all had a really good lunch. This is a really interesting topic that we're going to be talking about, and it's kind of a little bit different for the short stay market, looking at the flexible living sector. But before we crack into the discussion, I would love it if you could both introduce yourselves. And Rebekah, ladies first. If you could just tell us why you're here talking about this, that would be really wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. We'll try and keep you awake post-lunch. There's some sugar out there as well that will help. I am a managing partner and co-founder of Propela Ventures. I'm based between Amsterdam and London, previously from the US, but 18 years in Europe. I've started out in the advisory world at CBRE and Cushman & Wakefield, working across sectors, and then moved on to the principal side with most recently with a family office investor. And we have been a UK-based investor, investing across Europe in living sectors, so including flexible living, as well as traditional BTR, PBSA, and some co-living as well. And we'll discuss, some of the definitions of these subsectors of residential in a minute. And since founding Propela a couple years ago, I now work for the next generation of the family I was with as a managing director for many years. And we work with a broad range of family offices in different segments of the market in alternatives and living sectors all across Europe. So I look forward to a good discussion. The other reason I'm here today is I sit on the board of a short stay rental operator and tech provider called Under the Doormat Group, which has several different group portfolio companies, including Hosperia, which is their technology arm, Trusted Stays, which is a distribution channel for corporate and government lets, and Under the Doormat as an operating business, which does B2B, and Vive, which is their B2C arm. And recently announced just this morning is that they will be merging or acquiring a portfolio of One Fine Stay assets across London and Paris as well. So it's obviously a very growing sector, particularly in the B2B side. And they were the reason that they wanted me to come speak here today. So very excited about that.
Brilliant, Rebekah. And you bring such a great lens to this conversation as well. So thank you for joining us. And Maxime, would love it if you would introduce yourself and your companies to the panel as well.
Great. Hi, everyone. So I run a vertically integrated living platform. So there's Leufroy, where we do investment and development. All the platforms are focused on London. There's City Relay, where we do flexible lettings, and Opago, where we do operations, tech-enabled operations management, so basically providing housekeeping, linen, maintenance, guest support to the industry, managing around 5,000 units at Opago, about 1,000 at City Relay. And across Leufroy, we've purchased around £300 million of assets, mostly in the resi space, but more and more looking at office conversions. So we're looking at transforming offices into C1, into co-living, into students. So very much part of the topic today in terms of flexible living. And on the other side, we have recently created a new platform called Séjour, which is basically where we've aggregated all the 300-400 units we've finished refurbishing, and we've put them into this brand, which offers a branded proposition in the PRS sector. So very much like what's been done in the BTR sector, where all these brands like Get Living or Grey Stars, a lot of brands, etc. We are aggregating smaller blocks in prime London and putting them all under the same brand, trying to offer a community angle, access to your neighborhood, and basically a better way to live flexibly in a turnkey proposition.
So much that you're doing there. And to set the scene of this panel, one of the things that I sometimes think about is that back in the day, not that very long ago, we would have hotels on one side, very much in a siloed position there. We'd have holiday lets in one bucket, and then we'd have long-term rentals in another bucket. We now have this thing called flexible living, and you just said that you have a flexible living platform, or a vertical living platform, I believe is the word you used. So just for the audience's say, because I know that flexible living can be everything from branded residences, co-living, flex stays, it's also short stays, maybe service apartments, corporate housing kind of fits in there. What is flexible living? And Maxime, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so I think the way I see it is basically targeting the demand where it is. So it's really you're running, those assets, and it's really responding to whatever is going to deliver a better return from a yield perspective, but also what is going to cater to whatever the requirements are from the tenant. So it used to be, you're right, historically, your PRS stock is basically you rent it long let and you forget about it, and you get into annual contract, which we're going to discuss, I think, the rental reform, et cetera. But this is changing, and obviously it's becoming a lot more flex by regulation.
Yeah.
Or less flex, maybe, I don't know. But basically, that is changing now, and you're seeing, asset owners trying to optimize and look at the demand where it is. So could it be, a lot of demand in the summers, and you've got the long let living. You want to optimize your yield, so you're going to do short lets during that summer period, and then capture that next rental in September. It's also corresponding to a need, which is people don't really like to own things anymore. People want to experience things. So you see that big shift into experiential living where they don't have anything and they want turnkey product, and they don't want to think about anything, be it utilities or furniture or whatever. And this is the core, I think, changes into flexible living. Yeah.
So that demand from the customer perspective is that we want to be guests where we live in a way, like not show up and have to organize it ourselves. It's like literally show up and do. Then it's a big driver for it as well.
Yeah.
Rebekah, but from your perspective, what is flexible living? Like, is it the same as what Maxime is saying, or is there different nuances in terms of the asset classes that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think our first introduction to flexible living was actually a co-living platform that we backed early stage about 6-7 years ago in London. And we thought, okay, what is this co-living product? It's sort of a new, brand in itself, and how do we, finance this type of product? Because from also a financing debt perspective, lenders were not used to this co-living product. It was also very ambiguous in terms of the planning. How do we build co-living product? What is the use class? And so, we've seen what happened with the collective and everything else, and so it was sort of finding its feet in London. We took leases initially, then that transitioned more to management agreements with landlords, which is now becoming more the trend. I think from an operational perspective and leasing perspective, we found that actually offering, and these were smaller schemes in the beginning, so 40, 50 units up to maybe max 200 units, all studios, which were fully fitted out, en-suite bathrooms as well. And by offering those 90-day or 3-month minimum stays, we looked at actually the first property that we opened through COVID, unfortunately. Actually, fortunately, thinking about it, we did fill it up pre-COVID, and then everything obviously came to a halt for a couple of years. But we found that offering shorter stays and the tenants the flexibility, our average length of stay actually increased to 12 to 15 months on average. So even without a proper AST, which we all know is going away come next Friday on the 1st of May with renter rights, that the tenants, by offering the flexibility, actually gave us a longer-term tenure and actually more income security. But trying to sell that to our lenders was obviously a bit more tricky because they valued these shorter-term rentals and this flexible living in a very different way. Now it's obviously evolved, in 6-7 years on, we're at a stage where co-living is it's a proper subsector and becoming more institutionalized in its own right. We're seeing more comparable evidence of co-living buildings selling and more institutional money coming into the sector, which is always helpful, obviously, to really professionalize that as a flexible living operator. I think in Europe, because we're now more active in Spain, Portugal, Italy, Germany, flex is a type of co-living product. It is offering that shorter term stay. It is typically smaller units. Sometimes we'll do a cluster or go back to the studio model or a hybrid. And again, providing the flexibility, which is what the tenants really want, and adding on to that layers of amenities and the experience and the community building. And back to Maxime's point about branding that community and amenity-led experience does enhance your rental value through obviously increased rents as well as tenure. So I actually think, even in the commercial space, what we're seeing with offices and the hospitality now being provided in commercial buildings, let alone residential buildings, is actually changing the landscape entirely, where flexible offering is exactly what is actually going to give you a longer-term income security.
So we've gone from really early days of kind of maturity to what we're now seeing is institutional monies come into the space. Assets are being built for purpose as well. So it's a really maturing market. And for those maybe who are more in the traditional short stay, may not know actually all of this stuff that is going on as well. So that kind of maturing and bringing in the money and there's the interest from the investment side is really playing out, isn't it? And not just in Europe, but very much in the UK and across different regions as well.
Well, absolutely. And we've seen this sort of bifurcation of the market where institutional money is going to one of two places, beds and typically sheds. And so that's just a continuation. And beds includes all of these subsectors of residential. We are, basically have a housing crisis everywhere. So when you look at the market, we need more student beds, we need more senior living, we need more flex and co-living, we need more short stays. It is going to continue to evolve in all of those spaces, and there is a bit of a gray area between how that capital will be allocated. I think ultimately how we look at it is through operators. So we're very operator driven. When you look at the short stay, and frankly, renters' rights is disrupting the long stay because there is no really long stay market anymore. Everything is going to become flexible short stay. That is far more operationally intense than, as Maxime was saying, renting it out on a year-long AST and sitting there collecting rent. It's no longer a passive income option for institutional money. It's very much more, you need a good operator on board, you need good technology alongside that operator to really drive the value of those assets.
And just adding on this, why is institutional capital coming into this market more and more? And what you're seeing is, it's very hard to build in this city, right? I mean, you can see the latest building figures in London. There's no homes being built because the cost of construction is so high. It takes so long to deliver a scheme. So what happens is investors usually need to sweat the assets more. And so they want higher densities. They want to put in more rooms. And this is where this fits. So a lot of the time we're looking at assets which are, let's say, office conversion. And you got permitted development, and you could build resi, essentially from office to resi. But that usually doesn't stack up, right? It would never work. So a lot of the times, investors have to think, how can we make that conversion work? How can we put that building back to usage? And that comes down to looking at student, or looking at co-living, or looking at various ways to intensify the usage of the building, and also to build it, in an area that corresponds to that particular demand. So let's say if you're in a very busy area, it might not be very suitable to residential, but if maybe students are less caring about that. So it fits a real need of yield enhancement, and that's why more and more investors are looking at operational heavy assets.
And your journey, Maxime, so you were a traditional short stay operator initially when you started City Relay, but now you've got a branded residence through Séjour as well. So was that what was the sort of the driver for you to change your model, and not change your model, but add to your model?
Yeah, I think, there's several drivers, right? Obviously there's one which I think is familiar to a lot of people in the room, is regulation, right? If you operate in London.
And maybe we should just say, in case the audience aren't aware, about what's happening on May 1st. It's the Renters' Rights Reform Bill. And do you want to just explain?
Yeah, sure. Renters' Rights Reform Bill basically means you cannot issue Section 21s anymore. So you don't have ASTs, you don't have fixed-term contracts, basically. All tenancies are periodic tenancies. A tenant could give notice at 2-month notice at any time after, I think, a couple months. So they have freedom to leave, basically, whenever they leave. But as a landlord, you don't have the freedom anymore to issue a Section 21 and take back control of the property. However, you will still have the possibility to review rental prices annually based on a market review if there's any, if the tenant is not happy with the review. And I think this is the core of the proposal. And it will really affect landlords, especially if if you're a large landlord and you own hundreds of properties, well, it's fine, it's going to weather out and you're going to make it work. But if you own one property and tenants give you notice at any point in time, whenever they want, well, that makes a big difference for you. So it will make things a bit more tricky for smaller landlords. And I expect a lot more institutionalization of the rental sector in London.
And that was part of what attracted you then to change your model?
Yeah, I think several things, right? So short lets are complicated because of regulation, because of 90 days. So you need to be able to deliver a lot of mid-lets to make short lets work. And we've always played a lot with short lets and long lets and mid-lets and all of that. I find it not the simplest market to operate in. So when we started to build all those PRS blocks in London, they're all C3 blocks. And I didn't want to necessarily go into short lets because obviously short lets are better suited to C1 blocks where you can just do short lets all year long. So how can I approach these? And the approach was basically we're going to do flexible living, but mid stays and long stays, and not really use short stays maybe as gap filling. So maybe you've got a month gap in the summer. Short stays will intensify that yield, but it will not be your core solution. It will just be filling the gaps. So this was the approach when we did Séjour. We also thought, from an institutional perspective in terms of raising capital, it will be a lot simpler to have that offering as it will resonate better with investors. And the whole concept behind Séjour is, brands have been proven in co-living. A lot of brands exist in co-living. A lot of brands exist in BTR. But the PRS sector, which is a larger sector, is basically the block next door, Nothing is branded. Yeah. Nothing, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what's going to be inside the apartment. You don't know who's going to be the landlord, how you're going to be treated. You don't know all of that. So we thought there's a huge gap in the market to start branding the PRS sector. And we're at that, with the rental reform, with the leasehold reform, with everything that's happening in terms of reforms. We expect a lot of investors, or early investors, to sell their properties, a lot of landlords exiting the market, which offers an opportunity to scale very quickly a platform where we can brand PRS at scale. So far, we've done about 300-400 units that we've acquired, refurbished, and are letting. And the idea is to take that platform to maybe 3,000 units.
I want to talk about branded residences in a moment. But first, I want to come back to you, Rebekah, on the Renters' Rights Reform, and just ask you, what do you think the impact of that will be on the short stay market as well as the flexible market? Is it good for it? Will we get more properties?
Absolutely, I think so. As I was saying, I think the long stay market is going to be obviously impacted the most. And we've actually surveyed and looked at the BTR market and PRS market just in the UK alone. and spoke to the top 20 institutional players in that space and asked them, okay, of your portfolio today, what percentage of units would you think about switching on to short stay lets? And they've said today about 10 to 20% of their overall portfolio. Obviously, post May 1st, I think that percentage is ultimately going to go up significantly. And so, but with institutional money, and real estate is a slow-moving beast, as we know, slow to adopt technology as well, I think that will still take some years, even post the reform date, to really come into effect in a big way, and for institutional landlords to get their head around, oh, right, okay, we need a different operational expertise involved. We need potentially to bring in other operators. We need different technology to manage short stays. We need to manage our assets, from a vacancy and reletting cycle very differently than we used to. And even in PBSA, you still have the summer months, which are short let, and PBSA is not impacted by renters' rights, so that is excluded. But even with the bill coming out, you still have a 2-month notice period by tenants. 2 months is, in an undersupplied market, plenty of time to turn over that unit and have it rented prior to any vacancy. But it's just a different operating model altogether. So I think the larger capital will just need to get their heads around that, and it will take some time to filter through. But we could see as much as 50% of the build-to-rent market becoming very short-term led as far as rental.
Which might have a big impact on many people in this room as well, having so much more supply coming onto the market.
Yes, absolutely. And there's different channels, with the short stay market. As you can see, all the different channels advertising here. It's you're not just focusing on, BTRs generally to 1 or 2 main channels, and typically big landlords like a Greystar would have their own booking portals for direct rental. But I think you need to widen your net of how you attract this type of tenant, clearly, and what different channels that you're probably using as well. Maxime?
Yeah, and I think that's, talking about channels, I think where the BTR have invested a lot in building their own channel. Yeah. I think that's really something to think about a lot, How do you enhance your yield? How do you perform better? You need to find ways to compete outside of your core market. So if you do long let, you're going to go on Rightmove and Zoopla, and you find your tenants on Rightmove and Zoopla. But why are Greystar or Quintain or whatever, why are they building those? Why are they investing so much money? Because they don't want to be there. They don't want to compete with the rest of the market, because if they do, they can't enhance the yield. And that's something we always think about, when we build Séjour. How do we make the brand relevant? Who do we want to target? How do we find, Instagram as a channel, or whatever, as a website? Or, how do we make sure we are less and less reliant? And, in a dream scenario, we don't even exist on Rightmove and Zoopla because we don't compete with the rest of the market. We've built a brand. And that is, the ultimate goal, build that brand that will attract that traffic, that will generate that enhanced yield.
So it's almost like the North Star that we have for the short-term rental, but also the flexible rental, is build a brand direct, because of direct bookings, as well as building a community and a loyalty and for retention and all of those areas as well. It's just as important, but it's so difficult to do that as well, to build that kind of brand that is strong enough to then get that direct booking as well. Rebekah, I want to come back to something that you've said a couple of times, which is how important operations is to this model. And is that well known by institutional investors, that they need specialist operations here, not just can't really do it yourselves? And anyone who's in the short stay sector knows operating short stays is very, very difficult and very different from having long-term tenants. So is it well understood that there are different skills, different tech you mentioned, different kinds of ways of operating and processes that are needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the operator provides that, going back to Maxime's branded residence point, is that what operators are ultimately building is a brand that's synonymous with an experience. They want to be known for safety, security, health and wellness, good community building. There's something about that brand that when you see that building, you think, I know exactly what I'm walking into. I know exactly the experience I'm going to get, and that's why I'm going to pay that rent to go to that building. So with operators, that's exactly what they're trying to provide to the market, is this differentiated product based on how you feel about that brand when you see it and you hear it in the market. I took a very institutional investor recently to Germany to look at a product that we're investing in, which is a co-living flex platform, who are extremely focused on community building and, you know, a sort of health factor that they survey their tenants, and it's quite interesting the data that they're collecting from that. And the institutional investor came back and said to me, oh, well, at the end of the day, it's just property management. And I thought, you're completely missing the point. Property management is rent collection. It's service charge collection. That has nothing to do with what the tenant experiences day to day coming in and out of that building. It is their lifestyle. It's a lifestyle choice at the end of the day. And they completely missed the entire, all the details about, the nuances of how to create an experience, the welcome, the tenant apps, the engagement. All of these things are incredibly complex and they're incredibly operational. And I think the bigger money at the moment still misses those nuances. And if you want to get this product right, you need to be investing hand in hand with very good operators. And that's what we try and do when I say our approach to investment is always through a good operating partner, because we're not experienced enough ourselves to put money to work and operate it ourselves, especially in this more complex landscape of flexible living. We just would never do that. So a lot of what I do is not just looking for deals, it's really sourcing pipeline and product through the right operator partnerships.
Yeah, just to add on that, I would say, one of the reasons why we went vertically integrated and we built investment and development and then lettings management and then operations is because investors care so much about the ability to execute. So in your point, it really matters that you're able to operate what you built. And I think you'll see more and more vertically integrated platform will help you source, help you develop, and then help you manage the assets, because the LPs, the institutional capital, have no idea. They cannot do it. And they want to speak to operators. And I think you'll see more operators moving into investment or investment guys moving in operations and trying to own the stack, because that gives confidence to the investors that they're partnering with the right third party who can really deliver the whole value chain. So yeah, that's what I would add. On the community angle, actually, just to add one thing, I think it's so important to build a community. And I remember meeting with the guys from Cohabs and discussing the model and everything, and hearing how they work in these small co-living projects in London, and how much retention they get, how much referrals they get, where they get people queuing because they want to be part of that building where people are cool, and that really exists. It can be like this co-living, this guy lives there, this person lives there, they do such cool
Very
events.
aspirational.
Very aspirational, and a real lifestyle,
Yeah.
way beyond a rental. It's not just a place to sleep, it's a place to live, to experience. And they kind of proved it in a way where they explained me the model and how many people want to apply to certain location. It's quite impressive.
I think it brings also a question. Is where hospitality fits with real estate here? So is it that hospitality has infiltrated real estate, or is real estate kind of grabbing and chasing hospitality? Like, where do they sort of sit together? Because you've got on the one hand, the sort of like, maybe the drier real estate sort of side of things. It's very focused on yield, very focused on how do we make the most out of this asset. Then on the other hand, we've got, well, what does it feel like to be in this property and part of this community and this experience? Like, they are quite diametrically opposed, so it's sort of marrying those two as well together.
I actually think it's more real estate infiltrating hospitality. Hospitality alone is a much, real estate, of course, is one of the largest industries in the world, but hospitality sort of sits almost in a separate camp in its own right, an enormous industry. And I think, with obviously everything moving more towards, the community-driven, the experiences, hospitality has to be a big part of that. I mean, I walked into an office building the other day with a cafe and concierge, and I thought, am I in an office building or a hotel, or do I live here? It's all sort of really blending into one. Hospitality comes down to that experience. The first interaction that you have when you walk into a hotel or, now student living or co-living building, that first 30-second interaction actually frames your entire, stay, whether it's 1 night, 3 nights, 3 months. That is so important, is your first impression. All of that is hospitality training, and the right operators are training their salespeople and customer service in a hospitality type framework. So absolutely, that needs to come into play. It is way more about the customer service than it ever was.
And is that how you approach through your businesses?
Yeah, I mean, it's been driven by, the constant increasing demands, and I suppose a lot of people in the room who are doing a lot of Airbnb have seen, those guests wanting more and more and better services and everything. And it's the same for the whole real estate sector as a whole. You've asking more from your landlord. You want to be treated as a customer, and rightly so, because they were abused historically, where you're just a tenant and I'm a landlord, and you as I say, where suddenly that has completely reversed, and now you've got high expectations from tenants in commercial building or in residential building or in co-living or whatever. So everybody's got really, really high expectations, and they have access to, they know what to expect, and they demand it. And if you want to perform and you want to achieve a good yield and you want to achieve success and you want to have the right occupancy rate, you need to respond to those constant demands that keep requiring more. And I think that's just a one-way street. People expect more and more and more and more. And the key, where it becomes difficult, where hospitality starts to take a big place, in BTR, and I guess first, second generation BTR, where they spent a lot on all these amenities and everything, and they didn't get the yield, but they got all the cost of running this thing, and suddenly it becomes unviable, because with hospitality you get the high income, but you provide a lot and you get a lot of, and in some cases in BTR it's not happened. So it's difficult. You need to find a balance. From a séjour perspective, we chose, okay, we're going to focus on great location.
Yeah.
We're not going to offer amenities. The amenities are the neighborhood. We're going to partner with the neighborhood, with the shops, with the gyms, with the cinema, with whatever people want to experience. We'll partner, we'll give them discounts, we'll give them access, but we're not going to offer it inside the building, because it costs a lot to run inside the building.
There is so much similarities with the traditional short stay to that as well, like using communities and being, when you haven't got that offering within your building, you can do it elsewhere. I can see that Sarah is over there in the corner. Do we have time for a question from the audience, Sarah, do you think?
You've got, well, according to the clock, 3 minutes. Leo says 1. So let's call it 2.
One question? Has anyone got a question for Rebekah and Maxime?
No.
There we go.
I guess not. I guess not. But I think we have come up to time now. So thank you both so much for joining. It's a really interesting topic, this. So, I hope that people in the room kind of can see that this is very much a good future for short stays as well, or an interesting future. So thank you. And a round of applause for our
Thank you.
panelists. Thank you
Thank you very much.